Welcome to the Two Sides of the Same Dollar audio series. This is where the team at Cox Global Associates will discuss a variety of interesting money topics that you may be dealing with or that are in the news today. Now joining us are your hosts Don Cox, Cody Cox, and Jennifer Schneider. Let's get started.
Today we're talking about major life changes and your investments or your personal finances. I think between the three of us, we've got some unique insights and we have major life changes that we've gone through. And we've certainly guided plenty of clients through some of these changes. Things like we're talking about getting married or starting a new life with someone, maybe a divorce, or maybe even losing a spouse. So let's just dive right in and start talking about getting married or starting a life with someone. If you two had to give 3 pieces of advice, what would it be to new couples?
Well, the first thing I would encourage the couples to do is hopefully they're compatible on spending habits. One's not a spendthrift and the other one is very frugal. And I hope that, they all learn more about how each one believes in paying bills. Do they like credit card debt or do they like paying it off? And then, of course, I think as we encourage all of our clients to do, they need to always be saving a portion of what they make. If they're not participating in a retirement plan at work, they should start some kind of savings plan outside of work.
One of the things I would say would be kind of key to a couple kind of about to get married is, and I think this kind of goes along with just relationships in general, but it'd be communication. Especially about the finances within that relationship. Just discussing just something as simple as the budget, right? So how much money do we have? How much money is there to spend? What are your expenses? Anytime you're going to make purchases, especially larger purchases, it can be very important, obviously, to make sure kind of you each are aware of that. That way going forward, you're kind of both aware of everything within the relationship as far as the finances are concerned. Kind of going along with that as well, you should both discuss kind of your financial goals, both on the individual side and the joint side. So discussing whether you want to save something personally for yourself to buy something, whether it be a new car or something like that, or maybe even together saving up to buy a house or for retirement or wherever it may be. It's just always important to kind of once again going along with that communication to discuss everything financial wise, whether it be goals or the income or the budget or any of that sort of stuff.
What about age differences? Do you think getting married younger gives you a different set of advice if you're getting married older versus younger? Because I think sometimes, if we get married later in life, we've gone through some budgeting, we've gone through big jobs, and we've made some money. So that perspective, you might know yourself a little better than if you were to get married at 20 and you haven't experienced much life.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I think if an older couple's about to get married, they probably don't have as much to work through because they've been through all this before most likely, and they don't need to worry about kind of figuring it all out, whereas the exact opposite is true for the younger couple, to where they're going to have to kind of figure it out on the way, right? So they've never been through this before. They need to figure out maybe more about each other, but then also more about themselves, really.
Yeah.
They're still kind of learning and kind of find out who they are, especially in a financial sense. So yes, I think it's very different as far as the age.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, the older you get, the more wise you get, that wisdom does pay off, and especially, as Cody said, the experiences you've already gone through, if you're older getting married, you're not learning from the beginning, but definitely there's a difference in early on getting married and later in life.
Yeah. So why don't we post a checklist of questions you could ask each other if you're just starting out, whatever age you are, and it helps you learn more about your psyche and how you learn to manage money and from who. Because I think, initially we start to follow our parents' path. What did they teach us about money? My dad was a saver and a no credit card guy, but my mom was a spender. I rember times where we'd shop with my mom and she'd put clothes in the trunk until Dad went out of town for work, and then we'd bring those clothes inside that we bought. So, you know, we all learn different money habits, and to make us aware of that, maybe the checklist can help you think through some of those things.
Sure.
I don't know what we carry with us out of childhood. How about divorce? That's a big life change, and I think, you know, we all know people or have experienced divorce ourselves, either as children or as adults. What are some things you should think about if you're contemplating divorce at all, prior to, or help you process what life might look like after divorce and really decide if that's the right path or maybe there's a different path? What are some things you might suggest?
Well, divorce is definitely a life-changing event, and I hope with what we were talking about earlier about getting involved in the couple's finances, both of them, you understand what it takes to what you have to have as income versus expenses. And I think, as we've encouraged all of our clients over the years, is to both be involved in the finances. A lot of elderly couples in the past, the husband was typically in charge of the finances, paid the bills, handled the money, and the wife really didn't know much about it when it came to paying taxes or the income versus expense budget. But it's very important that the wife be involved, the man, both understand their budgets. And the one thing I think when it comes to a divorce is, you know, if you can't work it out, it's vitally important that both sit down, make a list of their assets, and try to work it out without attorneys. A non-contested divorce is about the most frugal way you can get divorced, versus when you start hiring attorneys and they see you've got a lot of assets. I've had many clients go through hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a divorce when I tried hard and pushed them, but some of them did and some of them didn't work it out, and they paid dearly by hiring attorneys. So an uncontested divorce where you agree to what the split up's going to be is the number one option. And if you can't do that, of course, then you'll get an attorney, but that's a very expensive route to go.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think are really one of the most important things that people should do, when especially preparing to go through a divorce, is obviously kind of look at the budget and your income and kind of help yourself build a post-divorce budget. So obviously when you're married, you've got a certain income kind of coming in, you've got certain expenses, and of course that'll most likely drastically change after you go through this divorce. So just kind of look at that, kind of look at what you have coming in as far as income for yourself. Look at what your expenses are, and kind of just make sure that's all going to kind of still work out after you go through that divorce. Some of the things you can kind of gather to kind of help yourself prepare for that is obviously all your financial records. This can include bank statements or retirement account statements, credit card statements, your pay stubs, your tax returns. Those are some kind of examples. Of course, there's probably a lot more to kind of think about and kind of pull everything together to kind of make sure you're prepared for that. Another little kind of thing you kind of look out for is while you're going through this process, you can also kind of make sure you kind of keep an eye out on your bank accounts, especially your shared bank accounts. During this time, of course, we know that it doesn't always go smoothly as we would imagine. So you want to kind of keep your eye out to make sure that your spouse isn't spending any of your shared money irresponsibly, because if so, that's something you can kind of point out later when going through the proceedings to kind of make sure you kind of get your fair share at the end of the day. Of course, Don touched on splitting the assets. Obviously, you'd like to kind of sit down with your spouse and kind of come to a mutual agreement as far as how you should split everything kind of equally. And then after the divorce, it's kind of you just want to make sure everything's kind of in line for you. Kind of going back to that budgeting stance, to where you want to make sure you've got everything in line as far as your finances, to how much money do you have coming in and what are your expenses. In reality, you probably should sit down and kind of create your own retirement plan, because things have pretty much drastically changed at this point. You had a plan, when you were married with the two of you for retirement, and now you need to kind of create your own plan. So we'd recommend talking to an advisor and kind of creating that retirement plan to make sure you're set for retirement.
And, to follow up on that, if you live in a community law state, typically the split is a 50-50 split. And going back to what I was talking about with attorneys, I have seen getting attorneys involved, it's no longer a 50-50 split. It's more like a 40-40 split, and you pay the lawyers with each other's 10% or 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So working it out and coming up with an uncontested or non-contested divorce is by far the best way to do it for you and your spouse.
So if I'm someone that hasn't been as involved in the finances in my marriage, what you're talking about sounds really overwhelming.
Right.
And it sounds like, where do I start first? What's the very first thing I should do if I'm thinking of a divorce? If I had to take only one step today.
So I think if you're someone that isn't as involved in the finances and you're at this point just thinking about it, I'd even maybe, talk to your spouse and just start maybe getting more involved, right? Start trying to figure out more what is going on, right? Because if you're not involved at all, you want to know, okay, how are the bills getting paid? Where are they getting paid from? How much money do we actually have coming in? What are our expenses, right? So I would just maybe try and figure out more what is going on. That way, too, if you ever decide, to push through with that, then you actually have some knowledge of kind of the finances within the relationship.
Yeah. And if you don't live on a budget, if you're not a family that does that or has ever done that, that's the time to start, right? So you can learn those bills and figure out where everything's going.
When you rank and look at the reasons why some people get divorces, one of the most common problems between spouses is finances.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why it's vitally important that the husband and wife stay involved. And as Cody was saying, if you're contemplating or starting to talk about a divorce, whoever's not been dealing with the finances, get involved with it and understand why and certain things are happening, because that's normally the cause of why y'all started having problems is financial issues.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, to anyone listening out there, even if you're married and not planning on getting a divorce and you're not involved, we would highly recommend you do get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, we also have seen too many situations to where, a spouse passes away and then that spouse that's left, they don't know what's going on and they're kind of stuck to where they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So we would recommend, before any of that kind of stuff happens, just kind of prepare yourself. God forbid that does happen, but that way you're kind of prepared.
For sure. One of the questions that we've come across more recently is, I have these assets, I know what they are, but I don't really know what happens after they get split. I have individual accounts or joint accounts, and I also have IRAs. Well, can I just combine them all into one account? What happens after those assets are split? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. And so it'll just depend on what type of accounts they have, of course. But, for example, if they had a joint account and they were going to split it, you could put that in your own, what's called an individual account. If they have IRAs, that gets a little more complex. If they had a Roth IRA, you could put it in your own name there. If they had just a traditional IRA, you could technically come out with a Roth, but there's tax implications there. Do we have to pay taxes on all the money there? So there's a lot of different scenarios as far as combining accounts, but you definitely can't just put it all into one without some sort of tax implication at some point. But yeah, so it would depend on how the accounts are split, and of course that's handled, through attorneys more often than not, but it just depends on the situation.
And definitely, I think talking to someone about that, trying not to feel like you have to figure it out alone, whether it's a professional or a friend who's gone through it, who can recommend someone that you feel comfortable with, because I think you do have to sit down with someone and say, what is this?
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you've been doing it on your own, if you are that person who manages it, sometimes it's overwhelming to figure all that out on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say definitely you want to talk to a professional in some aspect, whether it is an attorney, and then if you want to go the route of, like Don was mentioning, uncontested, you would talk to an advisor of some sort, or as you definitely want to talk to somebody, just kind of make sure you're on the right page as far as how it should all happen.
Yeah, and then there are attorneys out there that only do non-contested divorces, and they, obviously if you were in this situation, you would call one of them and have a meeting with them and they would explain how that works. And but one other area that I think we need to spend some time on, and that's if you lose a spouse unexpectedly.
So let's talk about what are some of the first things that if someone came to meet with you guys that said, my spouse passed away, I need to figure out what to do. What are some of the first steps that you go through with someone to figure out, one, what they have, but two, how those assets get transferred into, to the heirs?
Yeah, so you'd want to look obviously at the investments and what you have, and what they had, of course, right? So when you say, looking at the investments, especially if that spouse that passed away, if they had an IRA, for example, you'd have to transition that into your name. If they had other accounts, of course, you could also switch those over into your name. But then actually looking at the investments themselves and kind of what's in them, because obviously with this, sudden kind of life change, more than likely you want to change the allocation within that, because your life has changed so much to where, maybe you can have a situation of a man and a wife, and the man passes away, and the wife wasn't working, so now she doesn't have a job, and now her sole source of income is gone. So maybe those accounts were invested a little more aggressively, and now they obviously shouldn't be because of kind of the situation that's just passed. And of
How
course,
does someone do that, Cody? Is it just a statement they need, or do they have to call someone, or how would a spouse start that process?
so obviously a statement definitely helps, because that kind of would tell, if you're going to go meet with an advisor, that would tell them, where that account is, what type of that account is, what's in that account. So I would say that's definitely the first step. If that's it, would be find that statement of where that account is in that spouse's name. That way, once again, the advisor knows what it is, to be able to kind of help you move that into your name.
Yeah, Don, can you think of any? I know we've had some clients come in that have had these scenarios, and what are some of your experiences there?
Yeah, it's probably one of the scariest moments of a spouse's life when they lose a spouse and they have not been involved in the financial matters of their marriage. And when that happens, it's very hard for them to wrap their arms around it quickly. We strongly encourage a professional to help them, and honestly, don't go to what your neighbor tells you to do, or don't go to Google and find out somebody close to you. We encourage people to meet with at least two different people, because I think compatibility with your financial advisor is one of the most important things you can do. For instance, if you're a very conservative person and you go talk to somebody and you can tell they're very aggressive, they're young, they know everything, you're probably not going to be happy with that person down the road. You need to find somebody that's seasoned, has got some tenure in the business. They've been through the ups and downs of a lot of markets, whether it's bonds, stocks, or whatever. I just encourage all of our prospects to visit and meet with somebody until they find the person they're compatible with. That's very important for you to go home and feel comfortable that you're dealing with somebody you can trust.
I think we see two types of people, generally speaking, as someone who likes a lot of explanation, and then some people who don't. Sometimes they don't want to be over explained, they just want the help, right? So I think the compatibility is key to feeling comfortable and
that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've had people that come in and say, no, my sister used you for 25 years, and that I just want to do it. And so you start asking that person questions, and you find out that their philosophy or their investment objectives are much different than what her sisters were. So you have to explain the differences, because if you start operating her account or his account like the sister or the brother, you may be totally off base if you don't know more about the client. So we do what I can consider a very good job of finding out what's the best investment for you as an individual. And what your investment objectives are, how much money you're going to need to live on. Are you going to need monthly income? We have a lot of clients that get monthly income from their accounts and live on it. So it's very important to, again, find that investment advisor that you're compatible with and that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people come to us and feel that they don't know what they're doing when they probably do somewhat. I mean, it's not a common thing to go through. So I think no question is ever a dumb question, and you have to put yourself out there and ask what feels like dumb questions in order to get more comfortable, and let whoever you're talking to know that, you know, you like the explanation or you don't, and what your personality is. Yeah, you can't be bashful that way. Yeah. Maybe we can touch a little bit about inheriting an account. What does that mean to person as someone who inherits a spouse's account or even a parent's account? What are some of the required minimum distribution rules that we have to think about once we take on some assets that way?
Yeah, so when you inherit an account like that, or with any IRA, there was what's called a required minimum distribution, and of course those rules have actually changed here recently. So now anyone who's turned 70 and a half after 2019 is under the new RMD rules. And now, so you will take your first RMD for the year in which you turn 72. Mm-hmm. And so the beneficiaries who inherited that before 2020, they have to take the RMDs like you usually would. So you essentially have to take a certain amount out every year based on your life expectancy. Whereas now with this new rule, for those who inherited after year 2020, you would actually have to distribute that money in a 10-year period. And as of now, actually, the IRS is still kind of trying to figure this out. They actually haven't clarified. But it sounds like you actually have 10 years to kind of take it out however you please. So you can take out some each year of those 10 years. You can take it all in the first year, all in the last year. It's going to be however you want to take it out over that 10-year period. So that's how it's changed just a little bit here.
But at that point, it is taxable.
Correct.
And
yes.
So you as the individual, obviously, if you can leave it in there and get some growth on it to help you in later years, that's better. Okay.
What about cash flow? How can you help someone understand the cash flow that could come off of inherited investments? Let's talk about a spouse that's retired. What do you do to help people view that cash flow and figure out what the investments could generate for them?
Under our managed program portfolios, we can develop a model that will generate enough income on a monthly basis, and we run some what's called wealth trace. We run a program that we take all the individuals' income, expenses, all their accounts, and we can print reports and show them how much and how long their money will last and what their needs are for as many years as they are expected to live. So depending on age, depending on how many assets they have and their income needs, we can clarify that very easily for clients through that program. And of course, the models that are developed, how to produce that income for them.
Yeah, and the good thing about that wealth trace program is the fact that it can be so simple or so complex. So it can be as simple as, you giving us, hey, here's what I have, here's what I'm going to need in retirement, am I okay, right? But we can do it as something as complex as, here's all the assets I have, here's the liabilities I have, here's the investments I have, I want to do at this inflation rate. And so it's very good to where we can do very, very simple, or we can get more complex as far as the retirement plan to kind of see if you have money to last you.
I think common among all three of these major life changes goes back to knowing what's going on in your life financially and maybe having a list. There oftentimes you can have a list for each other, your partner, your spouse, to show where all the assets are, what all are your bills, make a list that you can each reference at any point. And have a safe place to keep that for whoever that is. Maybe it's even your parents or a sister or brother that you want, as a safeguard. So we can also put a list like that here. We'll post something alongside this episode recording that shows an easy list to take care of on an ongoing basis. Who should someone contact? Do you have an estate attorney? Do you have an accountant? And then where are your major investments? What custodians and who your financial advisor is. You should have that written down too. Any last thoughts about these major life changes that we do have to think about, even though sometimes not as pleasant?
Unfortunately, one of those subjects we talked about losing a spouse, and I've been through enough situations with clients or prospects that come in that need help, and unfortunately their spouse passed away and they didn't have their will in order, or possibly they didn't have a will, and they're so easy to get. You can go online and order a will on wills.com. I think it used to be around $19.95 for a simple will. You get it signed, notarized, and at least your assets and who you want to get your money is not turned over to the court to decide. So we strongly recommend all clients to keep your will. If you don't have one, first place, get one, and then to keep it updated as things change in your life.
And I would I'd like to reiterate something. I know we've touched on this, but I think it's very important just because we've seen this situation numerous times here recently. If you are in a relationship currently and you don't know anything about the finances, please get involved. We understand that at the end of the day, one spouse or the other is probably going to be the finance person, probably going to be the one taking care of everything. But please at least just ask questions. Maybe talk about it once a month. Whatever it may be. Because like I said, we've had people come in, whether it was through they just got divorced or whether their spouse just passed away, and they come in here and they're sitting and they're just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where anything is. I don't know. I've never done this before, right? So please just prepare yourself. We're not asking you to take on the full role or take it away from your spouse, but please at least just get involved, ask questions, know where things are, just know something about what you'll have as a couple.
Yeah, I'll say that's not a 1950s problem either. That's a current day issue that we're seeing amongst couples that are young as well. And so it could happen to a husband or a wife. Just stay involved and definitely never say, oh, so-and-so handles that. My husband or my wife handles that only. So please talk to each other and communicate. And that concludes today's episode of Two Sides of the Same Dollar. Thank you for joining us. We're Cox Global Associates, Don Cox, Cody Cox, and Jennifer Schneider. Thank you so much.